time is nearly up for Kamala Harris to name her Democratic running mate on the presidential ticket. US Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic Party's presidential nominee, has interviewed potential contenders ahead of her battleground tour next week. And among those who traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet the Vice President were Governor Shapiro, Senator Mark Kelly, and Governor Tim Walz. Also in contention are Governors Andy Beshear of Kentucky and J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, along with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Now, let's take a look at them one by one. Shapiro, who is one of the top contenders, has faced sharp criticism from the left, especially progressive groups and pro-Palestinian activists, and this is due to his support for Israel and his handling of the college protest that was sparked in US due to the war in Gaza. Then we have Mark Kelly. He is more than a politician. He's a pop culture icon and an American hero whose story of overcoming the odds is one that reaches beyond partisan politics. From Navy captain to NASA commander, he pledged his second oath of office to Harris when he was sworn in at the Capitol, D.C. in 2023. With just 4 short years in Congress, it's his personal background and backstory, in fact, that has made him a standout in the Democratic Party. Finally, we have Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz, who has captured the internet's attention and swayed Democrats' messaging by summing up how he views Republicans. He says they are weird. Clips of 60-year-old have spread widely, cementing him as a national voice for Kamala Harris's campaign and a potential pick to run alongside her as a vice president. Well, whosoever gets picked as Harris' running mate, a decision is required before the Democratic National Convention, which starts on 19 August in Chicago. And according to reports, the vice president is expected to announce her choice as early as today, ahead of her first public appearance with the vice presidential nominee on Tuesday in Philadelphia. Now, according to reports, the Harris campaign is also planning a social media announcement featuring the duo. One major lesson from Vice President Kamala Harris's sudden rise to the Democratic presidential nominee is that running mates matter. Backup quarterbacks need to be ready for big games and vice presidents need to be ready for the Oval Office. So what is the significance of vice presidents in the United States? Well, my colleague Nia Shukla decodes it for us.
Let's look at the role of the US Vice President. Some might think of it as the backup job, but there's so much more to it than that, now more than ever. So let's start with the basics. To be a Vice President in the United States, you need to meet a few simple criteria. You must be a natural-born US citizen, at least 35 years old, and a US resident for at least 14 years. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, it is. And beyond that, there aren't any special qualifications required. Most candidates have significant political or military experience, but technically you do not need any particular resume to run for this position. Now, how are the vice presidents elected? They're chosen as running mates by presidential candidates and then run together on a joint ticket. This means that when you vote for a president, you're also voting for their chosen vice president. Once confirmed at the party's national convention, they campaign together as a team. What does the vice president actually do? Constitutionally, the vice president has 2 main duties. First, they serve as the president of the Senate. And here's where it gets interesting. They only vote to break a tie. And believe it or not, this has happened 243 times with 35 different vice presidents in history. And second, they oversee and certify the electoral college votes after a presidential election. Now, it might sound ceremonial, but it's crucial to ensuring the transition of power. Now, historically, the vice president's role was pretty limited. They were often seen as standby equipment, ready to step in if something happened to the president. But times have changed now. Modern vice presidents have become key advisors, diplomats, and even leaders of significant initiatives. Take, for example, Walter Mondale, under President Jimmy Carter, who was one of the first to have an office in the West Wing and regular access to the president. This set the stage for future vice presidents to become more actively involved in daily governance. Now, let's talk about Kamala Harris. Sworn in on January 20, 2021, she's the first woman, the first Black American, and the first South Asian American to hold the office of a vice president. That's a lot of firsts. Kamala Harris has been more than just a figurehead. She's been actively involved in fighting for women's rights, voting rights, and tackling the climate crisis. She's also set a new record for the most tie-breaking votes in the Senate. Her decisive vote helped pass the landmark Inflation Reduction Act, among other significant legislations. So, is the role of Vice President important? Absolutely. Now more than ever. It's not just about being a backup now. Vice Presidents are now critical advisors to the President, often taking on significant policy initiatives and representing the US abroad. They need to be ready to step into presidency at any moment, ensuring continuity and stability in leadership. Cut to the present, we're at a pretty exciting juncture. With President Joebiden having stepped down and endorsing Kamala Harris, she's officially become the Democratic presidential nominee. Her popularity is soaring and many see her as a strong candidate for the presidency. Now, with Kamala Harris as the presidential candidate, everybody's asking, who will she choose as her running mate? The decision is crucial not just for the campaign but for governing. Her choice will reflect her vision and priorities for the country. Stay tuned to India Today Global.
Slavery. It's a sensitive topic to talk about in the United States, but there's a dark past that we cannot neglect, especially as US continues to confront the reality and legacy of slavery. But do you know how is Donald Trump's past connected to slaves? Well, in the history of the United States, Trump is the only living president who doesn't come from a lineage that owned slaves. So that means apart from Trump, every currently living person who has served as the American president descended from ancestors who owned slaves. In fact, the nation's first black president, Barack Obama, is also linked to a slave owner, and this is through his white mother's lineage. This data is according to a report that examines the ancestral history of American lawmakers and presidents. Let's take a look at the list. Starting with the current president, Joe Biden. He has one direct ancestor that goes 5 generations back who owned a single slave. Then we have Barack Obama too. He has one direct ancestor who goes 6 generations back and again owned about 2 slaves. George Bush has one direct ancestor that goes 6 generations back and that person owned about 25 slaves. Then we have Bill Clinton who has one direct ancestor and it goes back about 5 generations and he owned 1 slave. While for the President Jimmy Carter, he has one direct ancestor that goes back 4 generations and owned about 54 slaves. So why does Trump stand out among this bunch? Well, this is because Trump's ancestors did not immigrate to the United States until after slavery was abolished, and this was in year 1865. In fact, none of his grandparents were born in the United States. His paternal grandparents come from a small town in southwest Germany and emigrated to the US in early 1900s, while his mother was born in Scotland. And despite his recent ancestry, Trump has defended symbols of Confederacy. He has made efforts to oppose the renaming of military bases named after Confederate generals. A case in point, these Confederate states were actually pro-slavery and they fought for about 4 years just to protect this inhuman institution. They actually wanted a nation based on a principle that not all men are equal. But given Donald Trump's record on this front, one can say that sometimes apple can fall far from the tree. Now time for some quick updates from the political landscape you might have missed. As the presidential election draws close, Harris has erased growing lead that Trump was building before Joe Biden dropped out of the race. According to a new CBS News poll released on Sunday, Harris now has a 1% lead on Trump nationwide. And this comes as a huge blow to the former president as he was leading with 5 points when he was taking on Biden. And these numbers are being considered good for a candidate who just parachuted into a race a month ago. In fact, the CBS poll shows that Trump is still favored by voters on the key issue of economy. However, there also the margin is reducing. Only 25% said that they expected to be better off financially if Harris wins, and compared to Trump, the percentage is 45. Next up, a new congressional report claims that Biden administration has caught and released about 100 illegal migrants. These identities matched with the terrorism watch list. Now, the House Judiciary Committee has said that these migrants were caught by the Border Patrol along with southern border from 2021 till 2023, and these migrants reportedly came from about 36 countries, including the terror hotspots of Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, Tajikistan and Yemen. And at least 27 of these terrorism suspects were granted bond by immigration court and 4 were granted asylum. Next up, second gentleman Doug Emhoff's ex-wife has now released a statement defending her ex after he confessed to having an affair with a nanny during their marriage. Now, according to this statement given to the Washington Post, Emhoff's ex-wife said that Doug and I decided to end our marriage for a variety of reasons, and many years ago she also went on to say that Doug is a great father and continues to be a great friend. Emhoff and his first wife were married from 1992 to 2008 and share about 2 adult children. That's all we have for you in today's episode, but before we go, our executive editor Geeta Mohan spoke to former US President Donald Trump. Or not? Well, take a look as we leave you with this hilarious interview.
By doing just what I'm doing, fighting, okay? People love when you fight on the fake news. If you surrender to the fake news, they don't trust you, but people like that I fight.
You're watching India Today Global, and in the room with me is former US President Donald Trump, or not.
Hey, folks.
I'm being joined by Josh Rosen, who is a comedian impressionist, performs all over America, and like it or not, love him or hate him, he does Donald Trump impression. Josh, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global, or should I say former President Donald Trump. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Geeta, for having me. You know, we love India. We love the Indian people. We love India today. And we're doing so many great things. You know, we're really fantastic. We're leading in all the polls right now. It's really tremendous.
All right. Are you really leading in all the polls? From where I see things and from how I'm seeing things right now, it's no longer a walkover for you. With Joebiden out and Kamala Harris in, it seems like you're in great trouble.
Well, the polls that you're seeing are fake. They're fake news polls, okay? All the polls that I see show that I've got a 99% approval rating, and I'm doing a lot better against Kamala, okay? That's how you pronounce her name, Kamala.
Okay, but I'll stick to Ms. Harris then. Does she scare you? Because it does seem like from your past interactions, you have conceded and agreed that Joebiden had to leave and they needed a stronger contender. Is she strong?
She's very weak, okay? She's the worst vice president in the history of our country. Nobody even knows how to say her name, frankly. We don't know what her race is. We don't know anything about her, frankly, okay? It's very sad, and I'm not afraid of Kamala, cackling Kamala. I'm not afraid of her at all, frankly. I think she's a worse candidate than Sleepy Joe Biden.
Okay, but we've seen a lot of biases, very strong comments that we've seen coming from you, whether it's to do with her race or her gender. We've seen how you spoke just now, not so long ago, you've been speaking about her race, questioning whether she's African American or Indian. And on the other hand, there was a very strong statement that you made about a socialist woman cannot be the first president of America, and certainly not a woman.
Well, that's right. You know, we don't know where she's from. Like I said, I think she's Indian, but one day she's Indian, the next day she's black. Okay, frankly, we've never seen anything like it. And not only is she a socialist, she's a communist. Okay, she's a cackling communist, Kamala.
Thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global, Josh. Josh Rosen.
Thank you very much, Geeta. Thank you so much.